There's this one problem with Flux that's been bothering a lot of us, upscaling, but I think we finally cracked it, at least to a level where I can comfortably use it on my potato of a computer. And guess what? jasperai has just dropped 3 brand new Controlnet models that are, honestly, pretty amazing. You don't even need any new nodes. The ones you've already got will work perfectly with them. The new models are the Upscale Controlnet, the Depth Controlnet, and the Surface Normals Controlnet, and I have to say, the Upscale one is mind-blowing. So today, we're going to use it on the Flux Low VRAM workflow. My goal here is to build on this workflow. I want it to become an all-in-one that grows and evolves over time. Now, before we dive into all that, I just want to quickly apologize for not explaining how to install the Mistoline nodes in the last video. Let me show you how to do that first. But just a quick reminder before we start, Flux is natively supported in ComfyUI. All you really need to do is make sure ComfyUI is updated. If you find that some nodes are still showing up in red after the update, don't worry. It's an easy fix. Just go to the node manager and install the missing ones. The workflow we're using today has 2 Controlnet methods, and I've included the Mistoline method as an alternative in case you fancy testing it out. So let's install the Mistoline nodes first. Here's what you'll need to do. First, go to the custom nodes folder. 2, right-click on any empty space in the folder and select Open in Terminal. 3, once the terminal is open, you're going to paste the following command in, git clone, followed by the link to the repository, and don't worry, the link is down in the description. 4, hit enter, and the repository will start copying over. 5, after it's done, you can close the terminal and restart ComfyUI. When you restart ComfyUI, it'll automatically install the nodes for you, so you don't have to worry about any manual setup. Easy, right? Now that we've got that out of the way, let's move on. You're going to want to download the updated low VRAM workflow and drag it straight into the ComfyUI workspace. As always, all the links you need are in the description below. And again, if you notice you're missing any nodes, just open the manager and install what's needed. If you don't already have ComfyUI installed on your system, no worries. I've covered how to do that in my previous video. You can click the link up here or just find it in the description below. Now let's start downloading the 3 Controlnet models. First up is the Upscale Controlnet model. What you'll want to do is copy and paste the link, which you'll find in the description, into your browser, download the model, and then save it in the models folder under Controlnet. Just to keep things neat and tidy, I've created a Flux folder inside that Controlnet folder, and that's where I've placed mine. Next, go ahead and download the 2 other models, the Depth Controlnet and the Surface Normals Controlnet, and again, save them in that same models Controlnet folder. The links for these are also down in the description. The new upscale model is honestly a gift. I mean, we've all been trying different methods to get upscaling working in Flux, and sure, the results have been good so far, but trust me, you're about to be blown away. To show you just how good this is, I'm going to start by taking an image of a dog and then compressing it a lot, really reducing the quality. This way, you'll see how powerful this model is when it restores the quality. Now, if you've been following along with my previous videos, you might notice the workflow looks a little different today. That's because I've added a switch that lets you use either the Flux Safe Tensors model or the low VRAM quantized models. This means you get the flexibility of choosing whichever suits your setup better. You've got the best of both worlds, really. You'll also see I've added these group bypass nodes. Each group has its own color, so you know exactly what's being bypassed and what's in use. For example, the image generation part of this workflow is green, so the green bypass nodes let you easily turn that section on or off. Meanwhile, Controlnet is purple, so the purple bypass node works the same way for those models. If you're planning to use the GGUF plus FP8 section, you'll want to make sure that everything in the purple bypass node is turned off while enabling what you need in the green section. In this case, I'm going to start by enabling the text to image group because I want to generate the base image first. Now, I'm making sure the seed is fixed because I don't want the image in the text to image to generate from scratch each time. There's another step you'll need to do as well, and that's selecting which models you want to use by toggling the switch above. Since I'm running this on an 8 GB graphics card, I'm going to choose True for the quantized models. This automatically switches everything over to the quantized versions for this workflow. It's really important that you've downloaded all the models you need and put them in the right folders. If you're unsure where to place things, I've included a link to the video where I explain that in detail. It's in the description below. Something else I've added to the workflow is the Flux Resolution Calculator. This tool automatically calculates the best resolution ratio for you based on the setup you're working with. For example, if I'm using the quantized pipeline, which I am today, I always make sure the ratio stays below 1, but if I want to work with higher resolutions, I'll push it above 1. Let me give you a quick guideline for choosing these numbers. I tend to work with 2 megapixels as the max and 0.5 megapixels as the minimum. So if you're working with a low VRAM system, 0.5 megapixels is a good place to start. For normal Flux image generation, which is basically SDXL resolution, I'll go for 1 megapixel. And if you've got a more powerful graphics card, feel free to crank it up to 2 megapixels. Let's say I want to generate a square image for the low VRAM workflow. What I'd do is set the megapixels to 0.5 and the ratio at 1:1. That gives me an image size of 704 by 704 pixels. If I bump the megapixels up to 1, then I'm looking at 1024 by 1024 pixels. And if I push it all the way to 2 megapixels with the same ratio, I get 1488 by 1488 pixels. This calculator makes the whole process so much easier than trying to figure out the best resolution for your system manually, especially if you're trying to optimize performance and quality at the same time. Right, let's start by generating an image that we're going to upscale afterwards. We'll also test this method on a really bad quality image later on, just to see how well this upscaling works. So, to begin, enable the text to image group and click on the little arrow next to it to open it up. Now, we're going to change the megapixel setting to 0.5 and set the ratio to cinema view. This just helps to get everything lined up for the kind of image we want. Now, add a prompt. For mine, I'm going with something fun, like a close-up of a whimsical robot looking at a ladybug perched on a leaf next to a dewdrop that magnifies the ladybug. Honestly, Flux handles pretty much anything I throw at it, and the results are always beautiful. Now that we've got our image, let's move on to upscaling it. First, activate the Controlnet Upscale group by clicking on the radio button next to it, and again, click on the arrow to go into the group. The first thing you'll notice here is another switch. This switch lets you choose between two things. You can either upscale the image we just generated with the text to image group, or if you prefer, you can upload an image yourself. If you want to use the image we've just made, set the switch to true. If you want to upload your own image, you'll set it to false. Now, if you're uploading your own image, you'll use the load image group below the switch to bring in that image. Right below that is the Florence to run node. This one uses the Florence model to describe whatever is in your image. Next, you've got the load Controlnet node. Here, make sure you've selected the Flux Dev Controlnet Upscaler model. And finally, we've got the apply Controlnet node, which is the new bit that's been added. After that, you've got the Flux sampler and the preview and image compare options. Now, with the sampler, the settings are pretty standard, but where you want to experiment a bit is with the steps. We're using the Lora in this pipeline, so the maximum steps we can use are 8. But from my tests, I found that using 2, 4, or 8 steps all gives great results. One thing I've noticed is that if you're working with images from the text to image group, which are already pretty good quality, upscaling by 2 or 4 steps works really well. But for lower quality images, ones you've uploaded, for example, I usually start with 4 steps and go up to 8. Just remember, the higher the step count, the longer it's going to take to generate the image. Right, let's queue this up and see what happens. Even with just 2 steps, the result is pretty good. It's still a little grainy, but that's nothing a bump to 4 steps won't fix. The difference between 2 steps and 4 is like night and day. It's much clearer after increasing the steps. Now, let's try this out with an image that's really low quality. I'm going to upload a highly compressed image of a dog. I'll upscale it by 4 and set the steps at 4 as well. And here's a handy tip. If you don't want to use the Florence model to describe your image, you can bypass that node completely and add the prompt manually. That's what I'm gonna do here. So I'm going to bypass Florence and add my own prompt. A black and white dog looking up, eyes squinting with a person's arm in the left corner. Make sure that the switch is set to false since we're uploading an image and not using the one from the text to image group. It's amazing. The only slight drawback of this upscaler is that there might be a tiny difference from the original image, but honestly, the results are still fantastic. Now, I'm sure some of you are wondering why I bypassed the Florence node. Well, the thing is, the Florence model struggles a bit when it comes to recognizing really small or low quality images. For example, it looked at my dog photo and described it as a brown dog, which clearly wasn't right. So in cases like this, it's just easier to bypass and add your own prompt. And if you're new to all this and want to dive into the other text generation groups, feel free to check out my previous video on Hyperflux Lora. The link's in the description below. Next, let's talk about the two new controlnets, Depth and Normal Map. Now, these work pretty much like the other controlnets you've seen before, but the key difference here is how the resize node and the flux resolution calculator come into play. The way I tend to use these is to make sure both nodes are in sync with each other. So, for example, if I resize an image to 768 by 768, I'll also check that the ratio in the flux resolution calculator matches that. In this case, that would mean a 1-to-1 ratio. Simple, right? I'm also going to leave the apply controlnet setting at 0.7 for strength and 0.5 for the end percentage, but honestly, feel free to play around with these values, especially if you're using the Hyper Lora. It's all about finding what works best for the image you're working with. Now, I'm going to add the new Depth Controlnet model to the Load Controlnet node, along with the Depth Auxiliary Preprocessor. I'm leaving the resolution at 512, but I'm resizing the image itself to 768 by 512, and I'm going to adjust the flux resolution ratio to cinema view. For this example, I'm using an image of a woman walking her dog. But let's spice it up a bit. I'm adding this prompt. A beautiful woman is walking her tiger in a wooded area. The woman is wearing a white top, black trousers, and red shoes. The tiger is black and white with a black collar around its neck, walking on a yellow leash. The vegetation on the ground is dense and lush, and the woman is holding the leash in her left hand. She's looking straight at the camera. Behind her, the trees are tall and dark brown. The new depth model is impressive, really. It's not just good, it's capturing all those little details we want. Let's switch gears and look at the normal map controlnet. We're going to change the controlnet model to Flux Normal Map Controlnet and set the preprocessor to any normal preprocessor. If you don't already have the preprocessor on your system, don't worry, it'll download automatically when you start this process. I'm leaving the same prompt and settings as before, so we can really compare the results side by side. And let's run it. The result? Absolutely brilliant. With the normal map, you get more detail than you would with the depth model, but what's great is that the image stays really true to the original. It's almost like adding an extra layer of precision without altering the core of what you've generated. Next, let's try and upscale this image. First, I'm going to switch the setting to true for the image I just generated. Now, you can either keep the seed fixed or randomize it, totally up to you. Let's start simple and see what happens with just 2 steps. An upscale factor of 1.5 and a guidance scale of 3.5. I've set the controlnet strength to 0.7 and the end percent to 1. I'm also making sure the upscaler in controlnet is loaded. The upscale looks okay, but is a little grainy, which isn't ideal. Let's push things a bit further. I'm going to increase both the upscale and the number of steps to 4, but nothing happens. It's stuck at the sampler, and even though I left it running overnight, it still didn't finish. I dialed things back, reduced the upscale factor to 1.5, but kept the steps at 4, and this time it gave me something usable, although it's still a bit grainy. Now, here's where things get interesting. It seems like the upscaler struggles with really large images, which basically means that if you're trying to upscale an image you've generated and want to hit that high 4x upscale quality, the trick is to first downscale the image before upscaling it. Let me break this down with an example. The image I generated is 896 by 560 pixels. Upscaling it by 4 would make it 3584 by 2240 pixels, which is quite a large resolution for the sampler to handle. My advice? Downscale the image first, then upscale it. So if I downscale this image by 4, that'll give me a more manageable size of 224 by 140 pixels. Then I can upscale it by 5, which brings it to 1120 by 700 pixels, much more reasonable to work with. You can do the same thing with images images you upload, but remember, only downscale if the original image is too large. If it's already a smaller image, you can skip this step. I think I should tweak the workflow a bit here. I'm going to add a scale down node between the source image and the upscale node. This way, the image will automatically be downscaled before upscaling. Here's a quick tip. If you set the downscale value to 1, you're not changing the image size at all. A value of 0.5 means you are dividing the image size by 2, and a value of 0.25 means you're reducing the image by 4 times. I'm going to set mine to 0.25 and the upscale factor to 5. Of course, if you're uploading a compressed image that's already small, you can bypass the scale down step altogether. Right, the generation was actually faster than I expected, but the result is still a little bit grainy. So I'm going to increase the steps now. Since we've got that bit of extra speed, I'll set the upscale factor to 6 and the steps to 6 as well, and we'll see what that gives us. We've got a usable image again. You can play around with the settings to find what works best for you. Maybe try reducing the upscale factor to 4 and increasing the steps to 8 and see what you get. Honestly, I'm still experimenting myself to figure out the perfect combination. Just remember, if your image is already small, you can skip that scale down node, but if it's a big one, definitely use it. It makes all the difference. It's kind of amazing how small tweaks like this upscaler can change how we use ComfyUI. I don't have to export my image to another platform just for upscaling anymore. Anyway, let me know in the comments if you think we should keep the other 2 upscaling methods in the workflow, or if they're a bit redundant now that we have this process dialed in. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you want to see more tutorials like this one. It really helps me reach more people, and it gives me a reason to keep making these videos for you. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.